Hello.
Yeah, I think you are ready to go.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. Yeah, this is Dr. Kala Singh from Vancouver. Good afternoon. Namaste. Shalom. Salam alaikum. And Waheguru Ji Ka Khalsa. Waheguru Ji Ki Fateh. Uh, Today we are talking about suffering, hope and joy. I'll give you some background about Sikhism. That this is the religion which started around 560 years ago by Guru Nanak. At that time, what he found was that the world was suffering from injustice, oppression, exploitation, virtually because of misrule by the rulers and by the clergy. The clergy was exploiting the masses because if there was any problem like calamity or any death in the family or any something like that, they will give some irrational views about that and ask them to do some rituals, and which needed money, and poor people were already suffering. So what happened with that was that Guru Nanak started a journey at that time around 28,000 kilometers on foot around the world, about 560 years ago, to raise the voice and how to alleviate the sufferings about that one. And what he said was that everyone in this world, irrespective of religion or culture, wants peace and happiness. And majority of us don't know how and where to find it. So we try to find it in worldly desires like better education, titles, status in the society, caste, wealth, power, on my spouse, in my children, and so on and so on. And these give a false sense of happiness, as their status can change anytime. So Sikhism says that blissful state have to be sought from within oneself and not from these outside materialistic objects. So long one is egoistic, one plays in the hands of worldly passions. And the nature of the material world is constantly changing and nothing is permanent. So they cannot give a permanent happiness. We acquire worldly possessions with a lot of pain and suffering. And when we lose them, we get pain and suffering. So Guru Nanak on page 128, 1287, page of Guru Granth Sahib, the Sikh holy book, says that godly virtues, without godly virtues, worldly desires are never satisfied. For example, seeing beauty does not satisfy hunger or seeing more beauty. It only increases the hunger. As many are the pleasures of the mind, that many are the pains and sufferings. More we indulge in them, more we get dissatisfied, and more we want. That is the spiritual suffering. The 5 cardinal vices which are in the human beings, these are our major weaknesses. They are called thieves because they steal a person's inherent common sense. And these 5 thieves are sexual lust. And we have seen this in the Me Too movement, and how people have fallen from grace, and many of them committed even suicide. Anger, we all know that how anger troubles us. The greed, more we want, more greedy we are. And emotional attachment to our worldly possessions, to our children, to our spouses, and pride. So our senses are beguiled by these sensual pleasures. So we are always unhappy because we are trying to fulfill them. The actions of one's mind and by extension, one's body should be above, beyond, and without interference from these 5 vices. Their effect is stronger than the poison. Poison kills only if ingested in any form. But these vices kill the mind, spiritual life, and status in the society in such a way that one's life becomes miserable. And I said, many people even commit suicide in the Me Too movement we have seen. On page 1428, Guru says, we wish for something, but something different happens. Give an example. I built a beautiful house to live with my family, but a day before moving into it, house collapses. Say because of the heavy rain and mudslide. My expectation of living in the beautiful house did not get fulfilled. I become miserable with the loss. Now here we need to differentiate between hope and expectation. Hope, I wanted to move into a beautiful house, but if it was an expectation, then it hurts me. On page 379, according to Sikhism, true happiness, that blissful state, comes by imbibing divine virtues. And they are truthful living, contentment, compassion, that is forgiveness, love of the God and its creation, and righteousness. Not talking about suffering as medicine. On page 469, suffering is a medicine and pleasure is a disease. Because where there is pleasure, there is no God, because we never remember God when we're happy with materialistic things. And we don't have any desire to learn and improve. So we should not feel unhappy and miserable when we are suffering. Living in harmony with the will of the God, that is acceptance, and learning from the suffering to improve is an example of how we have to change our attitude towards problems of life. Now, I'll give an example. We wish to fulfill our worldly passions, but something different happens. So the mind is always at ease, unease, and unhappy. We then try different corrupt means of achieving it. I want a new cell phone. I want a new car. That is a greed. And when I can't buy it, I suffer, and then I get into corrupt means to buy it, and that gives me suffering. Nanak says, we should be contented and happy with what we are and what we have. At the same time, strive for more and better life by honest means. We should make our sufferings as an opportunity to learn and avoid it in future. Suffering and failure is an opportunity to learn. For example, egg broken from outside force ends a life, and if broken from inside force, begins a new life. When the suffering hits deep in my mind, I will then introspect and find ways to change myself rather than blaming someone else for my suffering. In the process, I am reborn as a new Kavasi. If we are always indulged with worldly passions and feel superficial happiness, we will never try to learn and to improve. Uncut diamond has less value, but its value increases after it goes through a process of cutting. That is suffering. Suffering and happiness are part of human life. And that is our own making, not the God's. Depending on our thought process and the resulting actions, we experience suffering and happiness. If our thought process and the resulting actions are primarily suffering producing, then we cannot avoid suffering. And to the contrary, if our thought process and the resulting actions are primarily happiness producing, then we cannot avoid happiness either. Accordingly, Sikhism reminds us that if it is foolishness to pray or ask God for only happiness by abandoning all suffering. What we need is to change our attitude towards life. If healthy life is a gift of God, then illness is also a gift of God. The body has to decay, and getting illness is a part of life. If we are getting miserable, then our misery is going to increase if we are miserable. If we accept it as a will of God, then we will be happy even in illness and pain. Something which gives happiness to one person might give unhappiness to others. Rich people can be very unhappy and poor very happy. That is, if they're contented with whatever they have, that is on page 820 of Guru Granth Sahib. Now, coming back to the house I built for my family, which collapsed because of heavy rain and mudslide, I thanked God for saving my family. Had I moved early, whole family would have died with the collapse of the house. So I turned my suffering of losing my house to happiness, blessing of God, through changing my view and attitude. That is the state of my mind. Coming to suffering by the women. Women have been considered as second-class citizens, as in fact, as a property of man through time immemorial. And Guru Nanak, 560 years ago, raised the voice of women suffering from this indiscrimination when he said that we marry women, we reproduce because of the woman. Women die, we marry another woman. And why should we call women as a second-class citizen or a law? And this is what we need to change. Now, what we are looking today, the physical suffering around the world. I don't need to say anything about that. Everyone knows. And Sikhism has been suffering because of these problems from over 300 years ago. I'll give you, I'm sharing my screen, that during that time, India was ruled by Muslim king who wanted to convert everyone into Islam. That was mostly Hindus at that time. And the Sikh gurus at that time stood against it. And for that, they were tortured at that time, like fifth guru, put on a plate, hot plate with fire under and the hot sand on top of that, and he got martyred because of that. Six got burnt alive, cut into two, boiled in pot of boiling water. Two young sons, 6 and 9 years old of 10th Guru, were bricked alive, cut joint by joint, scalp removed, tortured of the torture wheel, and young kids thrown in the air and caught on the spears and then cut into pieces and made necklace, put onto mother's neck. But they always thanked God for that, even saying that I have got no control over this. This is the will of you, of the God, and I accept it. So by acceptance, though it is very difficult, it's not easy, it's very difficult, but it can be done. The suffering which we have today, physical suffering around the world, if we can take it as not as suffering, but as the will of God, accept it, because if we suffer, if we cry, the suffering is going to increase, not decrease. So even in suffering, we can have hope, we can have joy if we turn into our state of mind accordingly. Thank you very much for listening to me.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Singh. Good.